of mass casualty incidents have occurred in gun-free zones. Yet, those gun control activists, they want to use tragedy, sadly, to push further restrictions like the ones that failed to prevent the mass casualty incidents. Even though you have data that shows that when people are allowed to be armed, when they're allowed to have their rights, the ability of a criminal to hurt them with a firearm is much lower, much, much lower. And this dangerous pattern happened yet again. When a mass casualty incident took place at the Henry Pratt Company in Aurora, Illinois, a place that clearly displays a no-gun sign on its front door, and yet you have all of those disarmament lawmakers out there using this tragedy not to expand the right to defend yourself with a firearm, but to restrict it, even though facts clearly show it just doesn't work. Joining me now to discuss this, President of Crime Prevention Research Center, John Lott. He's got a great piece on this, by the way, over at townhall.com, where it discusses how gun control advocates are using this Aurora tragedy to call for more background checks, like the ones, John, that did not work in Illinois twice. Thanks for joining me.
Great to talk to you. Yeah, I mean, they continue to use mass public shootings as a way to push for these background checks on private transfers of guns, and yet there's not one mass public shooting this century that would have been stopped by those types of regulations. They have Gabby Giffords come out when they launched the universal background checks bill in Congress on the anniversary of her tragic attack. But it wouldn't have stopped that attack. You just had a bill passed in Nevada where there was lots of testimony that was recalling the Nevada Las Vegas shooting that was there. And yet, obviously, it wouldn't have stopped that attack either. Or, it was signed on the anniversary of Parkland, and in part to say, look, we're trying to do something to stop these types of Parkland-type incidents. And yet, obviously, it wouldn't have stopped that attack either. But it's continually used, those horrible tragedies are used to go and push gun control legislation that has nothing to do with stopping those tragedies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You also noted, too, how Governor Pat Quinn, former Governor Quinn, cut more than half of the budget for the Illinois State Police Office that handles those checks. And you said he wanted to create long backlogs and delays in issuing FOID cards, that firearm owner identification card in Illinois, which then explains why Aurora police say, yeah, the Illinois State Police, when this guy's FOID card was revoked, we never ever heard anything about it. No, there was nobody sent us anything to let us know that this happened and that this guy was in our jurisdiction.
I mean, the problem was that the guy had 3 background checks, all of them going through the NICS system. Only the third one flagged the fact that he had this criminal background. Now, I don't know exactly what happened inside the agency, but here you have, at the same time, there's having this big increase in demand for FOID cards that are going on. You're having a 50% cut, over a 50% cut in their budget. And whether they try to do things, cut corners in doing the background check, or whether they just didn't even do it, I have no clue. But the first couple times, both when he applied for the FOID card and then when he bought the gun, his criminal background wasn't pulled up. And it just is a bit of a coincidence that it happened at the same time that they had this big cut in funding for the agency that was doing the background checks.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if these individuals that are making it impossible for the system to work, it seems as though they don't want the system to work, because if you have a system that's working, then you don't have the need for waiting periods. A right delayed is a right denied. That gets around that obstacle. And it seems like this is just another avenue for individuals to deprive people, separate them of their rights by making sure the system that they say they support isn't operational.
Right. I mean, look, economists have seen this in many areas. You have some regulation, it creates more problems. And rather than going back and removing the original regulation, the call is for new regulations, even more stringent regulations. And so you often have, this isn't just in the area of guns. You often see that regulations beget more regulations.
Yeah, no, true. And of course also, I mean, you get into in this piece how none of these the criminalization of private gun transfers, which is what they call the universal background checks, wouldn't have stopped anything previously. There's nothing that I've ever seen in reading on this issue, nor have I seen it on your site where you state definitively, well, yes, here's at least one case from this. There's nothing, no evidence, nothing to substantiate the claim that somehow private transfer between law abiding Americans, which is protected still in a number of states, that this is fueling the gun homicide rate or the rate of individuals killing people that should not be in legal possession of firearms and they're illegally committing an act with an inanimate object. I haven't seen anything to substantiate that would underscore their justification for criminalizing private transfers. And I mean, unless something's come up since the last time I looked at your website, I'm guessing that the answer is still no.
No, you're right. The answer is still no. I just wish sometimes reporters or hosts on different TV shows would go and ask the gun control advocates that they have on to name a case where these laws would have actually mattered. I mean, they let the guests go on and talk about how we need to do something and we're trying to do something. It's important to do something. But just asking whether the thing that they want to do has any relationship to the crime that they're saying needs to be stopped. But, you know, background checks simply aren't a magic bullet. I wish they were. I wish there was an easy way to make sure that criminals and others who are dangerous don't get weapons. But the point is that the current background check system that we have is a mess. When they say 3.5 million dangerous, prohibited people have been stopped from getting guns, that's simply a lie. What they should say is there have been 3.5 million initial denials, and that virtually all of those are false positives, mistakes. It's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a name similar to a felon from buying a gun. Now, one way to think about this is one of the main sources of illegal guns are drug dealers. Drug dealers have guns simply to protect the very valuable property that they have. It's not like a drug dealer. If one drug dealer steals another dealer's drugs, he can go to the police and say, look, can you help us get them back? They have to set up their own little militaries in order to protect that very valuable property that they have. Well, why do you think you're going to be any more successful in stopping criminals from getting guns illegally from these drug dealers than we've been able to stop criminals from getting illegal drugs? Do most people think that it's really that difficult for somebody to go and buy opioids? You know, when I give talks at college campuses, I'll often ask the students, I say, well, what if I gave you a few days, what % of you think that you can go and buy illegal drugs? And you'll have 70, 80% of the students raise their hands. I mean, I'm not saying even a fraction of those actually use it, but they surely are under the perception because of friends who have drugs or others that they could go and obtain them if they wanted to do so. And so why do we believe that it's any more difficult for them to get illegal guns? You know, I testified about a year and a half ago in Mexico before the federal Senate and House Constitution committees. And Mexico is an interesting case. You have one gun store in the country since 1972. Maybe only 1% of the population legally owns a gun. The most powerful rifles that you can buy are 22 caliber short round ammunition. And yet Mexico has a murder rate and homicide rate that's about 5 times what we have here in the United States. You know, they're not getting guns from gun stores, and they're not getting guns, despite what's many claims, from the United States. They're bringing them into the country from all around the world when they go and bring in the drugs that they go and end up shipping to the United States, or they steal some from the military down there. And so, you know, you look at a place like that, and that, you know, I suppose if we had one gun store in the United States and the military ran it, and it took forever to go and buy a gun, and you could only get small caliber guns, which aren't even being used by the drug dealers, I assume that would be nirvana for gun control advocates in the United States. But yet, obviously, that hasn't stopped drug gangs or the people who would get guns from drug gangs from getting them in Mexico.
Right. No, I agree. I definitely agree. John Lott, the piece is over at Town Hall. You can find him at crimeresearch.org. John, always good to talk with you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.